Let's dive straight in.
Yuri Gagarin's fatal training flight. March 27, 1968. Kirchak, Russia. It was cold and clear that morning when Yuri Gagarin, the first man ever in space, climbed into a MiG-15 UTY trainer jet. He wasn't supposed to be doing anything risky, just a short 20-minute check flight with his instructor, Vladimir Seryogin. Routine stuff. At 10:18 a.m., they took off from Chkalovsky Air Base. Gagarin radioed the tower. Everything normal, altitude steady, heading east. Then silence. About 10 minutes later, the jet vanished from radar. No distress call, no warning, just gone. Search crews started scouring the forests near Kirchak. It took them almost a full day to find the crash site, a deep crater about 10 feet wide, surrounded by twisted aluminum and burnt soil. Both pilots were killed instantly. The official Soviet report said they'd swerved to avoid a weather balloon and lost control in the thin air at low altitude. But that never made much sense. Gagarin was one of the most precise pilots in the country. Later investigations suggested another fighter jet might have flown too close, creating turbulence that flipped their MiG. Black box? There wasn't one. No cockpit voice recorder, just fragments. The impact speed was estimated at 470 miles per hour. They hit almost nose first. There was nothing to recover. Gagarin was 34 years old, a global hero, gone in seconds on what should have been a safe training run. His death hit the Soviet Union hard. They buried him in the Kremlin wall, next to national legends. In the end, nobody could prove exactly what happened. But everyone knew the truth. The man who beat space died in a routine flight, taken down by a small, simple mistake or someone else's. Blunt fact, Yuri Gagarin survived orbiting Earth, but not a clear sky morning back home. The Tenerife airport disaster. March 27, 1977. Tenerife, Canary Islands. What started as a small airport traffic jam turned into the deadliest aviation accident ever. That afternoon, Los Rodeos Airport was packed. A bomb threat had shut down a nearby airport, forcing dozens of flights to reroute here, including 2 Boeing 747s, one from KLM, one from Pan Am. Thick fog rolled in. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The KLM jet, commanded by Captain Jacob Van Zanten, one of the airline's top instructors, sat at the end of the runway, fueled and ready to go. The Pan Am jet was still taxiing on the same runway, trying to exit at the third turnoff. At 5:06 p.m., KLM was cleared to line up and wait. Moments later, Van Zanten said the words that doomed everyone. "We are now at takeoff." But he wasn't cleared yet. His co-pilot hesitated. "Wait, we don't have clearance." But Van Zanten, confident and impatient, pushed the throttles forward. The 747 began its takeoff roll. Down the same fog-covered runway, the Pan Am crew suddenly saw a massive shape emerge from the mist, landing lights closing fast. "There he is!" the captain shouted, slamming the throttles forward to try to turn off. Too late. At 5:07 p.m., the KLM jet lifted off too soon, tail scraping the ground, and its landing gear sliced straight through the Pan Am's fuselage. Fire and fuel ripped through both planes instantly. Everyone on the KLM flight, 248 people, died on impact. On the Pan Am, 335 were killed. Just 61 passengers managed to crawl out of the burning wreckage. In total, 583 dead. All because of one miscommunication, one rush, one moment of overconfidence. Aftermath. Every airline in the world rewrote cockpit communication rules. No more guessing what OK means. Orders must be crystal clear. Blunt fact, one man's impatience on a foggy runway cost nearly 600 lives. Air France Flight 447, June 1st, 2009. Somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean. Air France Flight 447 was a routine red-eye from Rio de Janeiro to Paris. On board, 228 people, including 3 pilots, Captain Marc Dubois, and 2 younger co-pilots. It left Brazil just before midnight, cruising smoothly at 35,000 feet. Around 2:10 a.m., the plane hit a patch of bad weather, tall thunderstorms, heavy turbulence. Ice started forming on the pitot tubes, the small sensors that tell the plane how fast it's going. They clogged up, feeding the cockpit bad airspeed data. Within seconds, the autopilot shut off. The co-pilots were suddenly hand-flying a 500-ton jet in the dark, with no visual horizon and wrong numbers flashing everywhere. Confused, one of them pulled the nose up trying to climb. But without enough thrust, the Airbus started losing lift. A stall warning blared. Instead of lowering the nose to recover, he kept pulling back, thinking they were falling too fast. For the next 4 minutes, the jet literally fell through the sky, engines running, wings level, nose too high. The crew never realized they were in a full aerodynamic stall. The captain, who'd been on break, rushed in, but it was too late. At 2:14 a.m., the plane slammed into the Atlantic at about 150 miles per hour, tail first. All 228 on board were killed instantly. The wreckage sank nearly 13,000 feet below the surface. It took 2 years to find the black boxes. When investigators finally listened, the horror was simple: a perfect storm of bad sensors, poor training, and human confusion. Afterward, airlines worldwide rewrote stall recovery training and cockpit procedures. Pilots now drill exactly for this when the plane lies to you and you panic. Blunt fact, they didn't crash because of weather. They crashed because nobody knew which way was up. John F. Kennedy Jr.'s crash, July 16, 1999, Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. John F. Kennedy Jr., the son of the former president, magazine publisher, and amateur pilot, was flying his Piper Saratoga plane from New Jersey to Cape Cod. On board with him were his wife Carolyn and her sister Lauren. It was a calm summer night, but visibility was a bad haze over the ocean. No clear horizon. They took off from Essex County Airport around 8:38 p.m. Kennedy was at the controls. He had about 300 hours of flight experience, but wasn't certified to fly only by instruments, meaning he needed to see the ground or horizon to stay oriented. At first, radar showed a steady climb to 5,500 feet. Then the trouble started. Over the dark water, with no lights or landmarks, Kennedy lost spatial awareness. His senses told him the plane was level when it was actually banking. Classic spatial disorientation. At 9:38 p.m., the plane began a slow, tightening spiral downward. Airspeed climbed over 200 miles per hour. Within seconds, it was in a steep dive. At 9:41 p.m., radar contact vanished. Fishermen nearby reported hearing a loud splash. The next morning, rescue teams found floating debris, a seat cushion, a briefcase, pieces of fuselage. 4 days later, Navy divers located the wreckage 120 feet below the surface. All 3 bodies were still strapped into their seats. The official cause, pilot error, triggered by disorientation in poor visibility. Kennedy had turned down an offer for a co-pilot that night. He wanted to fly solo. It was supposed to be a simple 1-hour trip to a family wedding. Aftermath: stricter private pilot training rules for night and coastal flying. Blunt fact, JFK Jr. didn't die because of weather or luck. He died because the ocean and the sky looked the same, and his brain couldn't tell the difference. Germanwings Flight 9525, March 24, 2015. French Alps. Germanwings Flight 9525 left Barcelona just after 10 a.m., heading for Dusseldorf. The aircraft was an Airbus A320 with 150 people on board, mostly Germans and Spaniards. In the cockpit sat Captain Patrick Sondenheimer and co-pilot Andreas Lubitz. Everything was routine until 10:27 a.m. They reached cruising altitude 38,000 feet, and the captain stepped out to use the bathroom. That's when the flight turned into a nightmare. Lubitz locked the cockpit door behind him. Within a minute, the plane began a steady descent, not a dive, just a slow, deliberate drop. Air traffic control called in. No response. Pilots from nearby flights tried to reach them on the radio. Silence. Inside the cabin, passengers probably didn't notice at first, but then the ground started rising fast. The captain came back, banging on the cockpit door, yelling to be let in. Recordings later captured it: metal banging, muffled shouting, alarms blaring. At 10:41 a.m., the plane hit a mountain at 430 miles per hour. It disintegrated on impact. No survivors. The black box showed everything was intentional. Lubitz had manually set the autopilot to descend into the terrain. Later, investigators found he'd been treated for severe depression and had hidden it from his employer. After the crash, airlines around the world changed their rules. Now, at least 2 crew members must be in the cockpit at all times. It was one of the most disturbing cases in aviation history. A pilot turning the plane into a weapon, killing everyone on board, calmly, methodically. Blunt fact, it wasn't a malfunction, or bad weather, or fate. It was one man, locked inside a cockpit, deciding when 149 lives would end. Top Gun test pilot. Art Skoll. September 16th, 1985. Southern California coast. Art Skoll wasn't just any pilot. He was a stunt legend. A flight instructor, aerobatics champion, and one of Hollywood's go-to guys for camera work in the sky. That year, he was filming aerial scenes for a new Navy fighter movie, Top Gun. He flew a Pitts S-2 camera plane, small, light, and agile, customized with camera mounts to capture the F-14 Tomcats from wild angles. His job, record high-speed spins and recover, something he'd done hundreds of times before. That morning, the crew was filming off the coast near Carlsbad. Calm skies, smooth air. At around 5 p.m., Scholl radioed from 3,000 feet. "I'm in a flat spin. It's not recovering." The tone was calm, but seconds later he added, "I've got a problem." Then silence. Observers saw the little red Pitts spiral down in tight circles until it disappeared into the Pacific. No parachute, no debris field. Rescue boats rushed to the coordinates but found nothing but a faint oil slick. Art Skoll and his plane were never recovered. He was 53. Investigators guessed the extra weight from the camera rig changed the plane's balance, making spin recovery impossible. But with no wreckage, no one could be sure. The footage he was shooting was lost too. The final film includes none of it. The movie closes with a dedication card, "In memory of Art Skoll." He'd spent his life teaching pilots how to push the limits safely, and in one moment, those limits caught up. Blunt fact, the man who filmed fighter jets cheating death died trying to show what it looked like. Egypt Air Flight 990, October 31st, 1999. Atlantic Ocean, off Nantucket Island. Egypt Air Flight 990 took off from New York's JFK Airport at 1:20 a.m., headed for Cairo. On board, 217 people, mostly Egyptians, including a full relief crew. It was a quiet red-eye. Clear skies, calm air. In the cockpit, Captain Ahmed El-Habashi and Relief First Officer Gamil Al-Batouti. About half an hour into the flight, the captain left for a bathroom break, leaving Al-Batouti alone at the controls. At 1:50 a.m., radar showed the Boeing 767 suddenly descending, fast. The autopilot had been turned off. The throttles were pulled to idle. Then the plane nosed down. In the final cockpit recording, investigators heard Al-Batouti repeating one phrase in Arabic. "Tawakkalt ala Allah. I rely on God." He said it over and over as the jet plummeted toward the ocean. The captain rushed back in, shouting, "What's happening? Pull it up!" The recording captured both men fighting over the controls, one trying to save the plane, the other pushing it down. The 767 dropped from 33,000 feet at nearly 400 miles per hour, then briefly leveled off before diving again. It hit the Atlantic at 4:50 a.m. Egyptian time, disintegrating on impact. No survivors. The NTSB investigation found no signs of mechanical failure. Every movement in the cockpit was deliberate. The throttles pulled, the autopilot off, the nose forced down. Egyptian officials rejected the suicide theory, blaming instead a sudden mechanical problem. But the U.S. report stood firm. Deliberate action by the co-pilot caused the crash. The result was the same, 217 lives lost in minutes, and no clear answer why. Blunt fact, one man whispered a prayer and took an entire plane with him into the ocean. Space Shuttle Challenger. January 28, 1986. Cape Canaveral, Florida. It was supposed to be a celebration. The Space Shuttle Challenger, Mission S, TS-51L, was carrying 7 astronauts, including schoolteacher Krista McAuliffe, the first civilian in space. Thousands watched live, including kids across the U.S. launch time. 11:38 a.m. The weather was cold, 36 degrees Fahrenheit, colder than any previous shuttle launch. Engineers had warned NASA about a problem. Rubber O-rings on the solid rocket boosters could fail in low temperatures. The warning was ignored. At liftoff, everything looked fine. The shuttle climbed steadily through the blue sky. 73 seconds in, cameras caught a small burst of flame on the right booster. That flame burned through the O-ring joint, letting hot gas leak into the external fuel tank. At 11:39 a.m., the tank ruptured. The shuttle broke apart in midair, engulfed in fire and smoke. The crew cabin shot forward intact, but falling fast from 46,000 feet. Millions of people saw it live on TV, a white trail in the sky splitting into two. Commentators went silent. Controllers in Houston said, "Flight, we've had a major malfunction." It took 2 minutes and 45 seconds for the cabin to hit the ocean. The impact speed, over 200 miles per hour. All 7 crew members, Francis Scobie, Michael Smith, Ellison Onizuka, Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, Gregory Jarvis, and Krista McAuliffe, were killed instantly. The Rogers Commission later exposed exactly what happened. NASA's pressure to launch on schedule, engineers ignored warnings, and the flawed booster design that failed in the cold. Challenger grounded the shuttle program for nearly 3 years. Every launch after that carried the memory of those 7. Blunt fact, it wasn't space that killed them. It was management, rushing a launch on a freezing morning. Every one of these stories has the same ugly thread. The sky doesn't forgive mistakes. It doesn't matter if you're a space hero, a movie pilot, or a passenger on a commercial jet. One rushed decision, one ignored warning, one moment of overconfidence, and that's it. Aviation looks glamorous, but it's built on the bones of lessons learned the hardest way possible. Every checklist, every cockpit rule, every delay you complain about at an airport, someone died to make it happen. So next time you're on a flight and the pilot says they're waiting on clearance or running another safety check, remember why. Blunt fact, progress in the sky is written in blood, and every tragedy up there made flying safer for everyone down here.